Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, once again with another episode of The Wow and the How, or The How and the Wow, and the Kung Pao of Hebrew. Today, special guest, dueling rabbis, technically speaking. Welcome back, both of y'all. It's a pleasure to have you here for sure. And so today's show, y'all, you have called a Messianic Seder, Proof or Spoof.
That's correct.
That is fabulous. That's what that is. Great title.
Well, we'll see. It depends which side of the equation you're on, right?
Yes, indeed.
So, so let me just kind of jump right into it.
Okay, very good.
Of course, we do have. We've never done this. You've done this with Rabbi Singer. You know, you've one-upped me on that 2 or 3 times, I guess. Starting back in Yerushalayim in January, I guess you guys were on a couple of times live from there. So, Rabbi Shulman, glad to have you with. I want to go through a quick introduction on some things here today. And, we just came through Pesach this last week. We had the 2 Seder nights that we normally do outside the land of Israel, where they have one. And a phenomenon that's crept into, the church world and on the fringes of the Jewish world over the last, say, 40 years or so, has been this concept of a Messianic Seder. And there are, you see it advertised in various ways. Like here's Rabbi Ron, and he's.
Oh, he just froze, didn't he? Oh, there you go.
And cool. So the New Testament has some description of course, everyone knows the depiction of the Last Supper, but that it was really a Seder, and that's a whole discussion in itself. And today we want to talk about this particular subject, and I want to, I guess, inject a little personal history into all of this, because many, many years ago, more than 25, I was not in the synagogue. And going back 30 years or more, I was very much in the church and was a young minister in a charismatic congregation. And one of the things that I decided to do one year in the large church I was part of, you'll see it in a moment, was to invite in someone to give us a Messianic Seder. And I'll say more about them in a moment. Now, there are 2 big organizations, they're not the only ones, Jews for J and then Chosen People Ministries, which make pitches to evangelical churches, charismatic churches, to bring in some of their representatives to teach the evangelical Christians about how to discern Messiah in the Passover. And they say that the Passover is a template and really a kind of a hidden ritual that reveals the real truth that the Jewish people have not awakened to realize, and that's that the Messiah is knowable through the Passover Seder. They also use it as a way of kind of exciting the people, and this is something I read from Chosen People, where they said, did you ever notice how sometimes people can get so caught up in their circumstances they become the sole focus? Sometimes people are looking for quick answers to help solve the problem of the moment. Through the powerful presentation that's called Messiah in the Passover, the faith of your church can be deepened to have an anchor in the midst of their difficulties. And here are 3 things that they promise will happen as a result of having this ritual evening of explanation. It'll be giving them the big picture of redemption history by connecting the Passover of Exodus through the traditions of Judaism to the Last Supper that JC had with his disciples. The people will be seeing the connections between the Old and New Testaments and how they relate personally to their lives, and finally understanding how JC didn't come out of a vacuum, but was the powerful fulfillment of the Passover Lamb who redeems them from slavery to sin and death. And of course, when I was back in the church many years ago, in fact, here it is, this is in Southern California, when I became part of it back in 1973, when I came to Bible college, it was just this part of the building here. And let me get my laser pointer up. That would even be better. Okay, you can see my laser pointer now. You can, yes, there it is. So it was just, and then they made an extension here, and the place grew. I mean, when it began it was taken over by the senior minister in 1968 or so. Had about 18 people ranging around in it, and by the time I got there were some 800 people. And with time, going to the left of that building in the next corner, they bought this lot, and this houses about 2,500 people, 5 services on a Sunday. And down to the right of the first building that we looked at, this used to be a barbecue restaurant, and the church bought the property. It was used as a multi-purpose. They kept the kitchen in there. So one fine year, I think the year was 1986, if I remember correctly, I decided, because we had so many Jewish people in the church had reached about 10,000 people by that time, and I calculated we had somewhere between 400 and 500 Jews in our congregation. And I thought, you know what? We should do how to see Messiah in the Passover. So I arranged for the use of this building with its kitchen. It would seat at tables about 150 people. And how many Seder nights did I just mention a couple of minutes ago that we have outside the land of Israel? Test question.
Are you,
two.
Outside is two. Why?
Outside of Israel.
I thought you were talking to
That's right. Okay.
We got a guest on the show now. Come on.
Not to be outdone by the Jews having 2 Seder nights, we had 4 Seder nights. Because I had such response. We had 600 people that responded back in 1986 that wanted to come to this event. And so we packed them into this place, and I gave it as an opportunity for the Jews in my congregation to be the waiters and waitresses. Wasn't that nice? As they served up we served up all this non-kosher food that particular evening. And I wanted somebody who was really good at demonstrating it and who really looked the part. And this is someone by the name of, he's no longer with us, so Eliezer Urbach, Alav HaShalom, as we say, upon him be peace. He died in 2009. And he was quite a fascinating person. I can just read it real quickly over here about him. Eliezer Urbach was a native of Poland, not realizing he was Jewish. The Russians had him jailed during the war for being a Nazi spy. He was released and served in the Russian army as a newspaper editor for a propaganda journal. That served him, by the way, because he became quite the propagandist for the Messianic movement. So he and his wife, Sarah, also deceased, are Hebrew Christians. That's what they were called back in those days, by the way. This whole concept of Messianic Jew, it's a very recent invention in nomenclature. Hebrew Christians was the terminology. He first heard the gospel in Brazil, was later baptized in Israel. Besides his fluent, if slightly accented English, Mr. Urbach speaks a fluent Yiddish, Polish, Russian, Hebrew, Portuguese, and Spanish. Pretty smart guy. And I happened to run across this picture of him. I don't know if you can see the date here. This is May of 1976. That's kind of how we looked back then. Remember those shirts? No, you're too young, William, to remember those shirts.
Hey, I remember those shirts very well. I was born in the 70s. Come on now.
So he was quite the propagandist, and he was very entertaining. He looked like, Rabbi Shulman, forgive me, he looked like a Hostess from Williamsburg. You know, he had all the sprach, all the things he knew to say, and he had the people just on the edge of their seats. And I remember him so forcibly holding up the tray with the 3 matzahs in it, the kara it's called, and he would say, "Behold the matzah, 3 pieces here. These represent the Av, the Ben, and the Ruach HaKodesh, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And he took out the second piece, and he said, "This is the second piece, the Afikoman, and it's broken for, his body was broken for our sins. And look, this part is taken away and wrapped in a shroud, and then it comes back. That's the resurrection. And look at the matzah. See the stripes on the matzah. Those are the stripes on the back of Messiah when he was whipped by the Romans for our sins. And see the holes in the matzah. That is representative of the nails in his hands and his feet." It was very, he had them going, When I talk about this, if I've been to some yeshivas that I've been to, I think, did your Rebbe ever teach you this sort of thing? Come on, guys. This is what we call Torah in the stairs, a hidden Torah. So he really had all of us going, especially me. I thought I was doing a great service both to the Jews in my congregation to reinforce the messianic nature of their faith, and for the Christians to make this connective tissue between Christianity and Judaism that was represented hidden really in the Seder service itself. And of course, as we further in that magazine I just showed you, I just happened to come across this page. I was looking through it. This is from, again, 1976. There's a conference on biblical prophecy, the Bicentennial Conference on Prophecy, that happened in Philadelphia. And the personalities here, I remember some of these very well. This was Dr. John Walford from Dallas Theological Seminary. This personality, this is the only Jew here, is Dr. Charles Feinberg. Now, his name is significant to us in New York because he was a Jewish evangelical theologian, and the Feinberg Center on Coney Island Avenue, not too far from where Rabbi Shulman is, is named after him. So that's this like $4 million operation that Chosen People Ministries has over there on Coney Island Avenue. This person way over here on the left, Hal Lindsey, is a name that a lot of people go back and
I remember
he wrote
that.
the very well-known book called The Late Great Planet Earth, which was translated into numerous, it sold tens of millions of copies in various languages. I met him a couple times at some Christian conferences through the years. And then these personalities, Dr. Criswell from the First Baptist Church of Dallas, McCorkle here, and Radmacher and Larry Ward. These are all evangelicals of significant note who were influence brokers. Around shortly after this particular prophecy event, I think it was 1982, this book came out. Rabbi Shulman, you might remember this one.
Yeah,
I had a copy of it. You remember this one? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Phil Goebel. So this was originally a thesis. It was that was published by William Carey Press, which is William Carey International University, is where I did graduate work. And it has the imprimatur, or the, what would you call it, haskama, the approbation of Dr. Donald McGavran. Now, why is his name even significant? Because he was a major missiologist. That's a person who teaches the science of missionizing. Did you know there was a science of missionizing? There is. And he was a founding dean of the School of World Mission at Fuller Theological Seminary, where I did some graduate work in Hebrew in Pasadena, California. And Rabbi, there's a big lav deal. Dr. McGavran wrote in the foreword of this to Phil Goebel. He said, I'm giving you some guidelines. And he says, I'm hoping that the 50 or so Messianic congregations in North America today will become hundreds, if not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, something cute like that. Well, of course, this particular manual, this book, which originally was a thesis, went on to inspire the formation of hundreds of various congregations, because he laid out a blueprint of what to do in order that this place would feel more like a Reform congregation, really, certainly not Orthodox, and having witnessed of them. In the ensuing years since then, we have seen a lot of production, a lot of publication of various, around this time of year, Messianic Passover Haggadahs. These are just a few of many that are floating around out there. The best known one probably is this one here for the Messianic Passover Haggadah. They've also come out in other languages, in Spanish and in Russian. And the impression that one gets today from the proliferation of all of this literature is that it's always been this way. And so for someone who has come into the Messianic movement recently, like let's say in the last 5, 10 years or so, even 15 years, with all the literature that's here and with all the ceremony that's here and all the ritual that's here, a person could really get the impression that this is how it's been for the last 2,000 years. Okay, fine, it was derailed, so whatever, Catholic Church, etc. But that there's been this thread of continuity of the Jewish believer down from the time of the early apostles. And that is a big myth perception. We're going to talk about that. So I want to segue now to Rabbi Shulman and mention to everyone that there's not enough written on the subject of the Jewish response to Messianic Seders, but he's done it. And at the very end, I'll give you a URL that you can, it's really easy to write down. You'll see it at the end here on the last slide. But I wanted us to kind of have a little back and forth conversation about a number, not all, but a number of the different claims that Messianics make to, from their point of view, justify, validate that JC, the Messiah, is observable, findable, discoverable in the Passover Seder. Again, I certainly thought that was the case. I thought the three matzahs represented the Trinity. I thought the stripes represented the Roman whiplashing, and that the holes, why are there holes in the matzah? To keep it from rising. It's not because it represents some crucifixion thing. But, when you have an agenda, you can paint it like the story of was the Maggid of Medrash. I always get confused about shooting the arrow, painting the bullseye. I want to go through a number of these claims with you, Rabbi Moshe, and let's see where it goes. So I pulled these really from the paper that you wrote on this, so hopefully you'll be familiar with it. I'm sure you are. They make the claim, did you know that the use of three matzahs is Christian in origin? Wow. Based on the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Did you know that the middle matzah, which represents the Son, JC, is broken to represent the crucifixion? And did you know that this piece is hidden in a cloth, just like JC was hidden in shrouds, and that it's taken out later, just like JC was raised from the dead. What do you say to that?
Well, the truth of the matter is it's a joke. The truth of the matter is most Jews don't really know. They know what we do now, but they don't know the history behind everything. One of the most important things to know about Judaism is every single thing that we do has a reason, and some of it is because of historical development, something dealing with issues that come up over time, and some things are go back. You can see directly in the Talmud, and you can see from even beforehand. So every single thing that we do as Jews has a reason for it. Now, the truth of the matter is over 90% of the people don't learn about these subjects because it's not important, not interesting. You have 3 matzahs because, that's what everybody does nowadays, and so you do that, and you do the middle matzah because that's what everybody does. But really, historically, unless you've learned the sources, you don't really come up to it.
So you say there have not, from let's say from the first Seder ever, whatever the date was, you're saying they didn't have 3 matzahs there?
Well, actually, no. The first Seder that they would have only had a half a matzah.
A half a matzah?
Yeah.
Please explain.
Okay. To understand that, we have to go back to a few terms that come up all the time to understand the development of it. And then there's a few passages in the Talmud. All these things in the article, but I had a fuse form with me just to have it. There's a few things in Jewish law that you need to understand in order to get to where we are today. The first thing is something called lechem mishnah. It literally means 2 loaves of bread. And the reason is as we know, on the weekdays, on Friday, when they were in the desert, they used to fall down the man from heaven, enough for people to eat.
Manna from heaven, right.
Because on Shabbos, they weren't going to have it. It came a double portion.
Right.
Okay. So to represent a double portion, there is a custom on Shabbos to have 2 loaves of bread. On Yom Tov, there's also, but it's a weaker thing. It's not the same thing as that. Okay, it's the first thing to keep in mind. The second issue is why do we break the bread at all? And that is actually from a passage in the Talmud. It refers to the matzah that we eat there as lechem oni. It's a verse in the Torah. The Torah calls it lechem oni. Poor person's bread.
Just kind of forgive me for interrupting. I just want to make sure people remember these terms. So the first thing we talked about was lechem mishnah, which really means 2 loaves. And the reason we have 2 loaves in Shabbat is it's a double portion because on Fridays, on Yom Shishi, a double portion of the manna from heaven, fell in the desert because it did not fall on the Sabbath. Okay, so that's the first thing. Lechem mishnah. Mishnah means 2 in this case. Now we have
lechem oni, which means poor bread. Now, the Talmud asks about it, what is the reason, what's it called? And it says here in the Talmud in Pesukim, where it talks about the Seder, the order of the Seder, what you're supposed to do, in the last chapter, it says that the way of a poor person is to eat on a piece. If you were poor, you didn't have enough money to buy a whole bread, or if you had a whole bread, you had to divide it in order to eat it. And so the way of poor people was to eat on a piece. So lechem oni means a poor person's bread, meaning it's not a full bread, it's a piece of a bread. Okay?
Right, and we know that in the Seder, early on in the Seder, we talk using Aramaic terminology. It speaks about ha lachma anu.
Yeah, ha lachma anu. Lachma anu is actually Aramaic for lechem oni.
Right.
The third thing is a very important principle in Jewish law, is if you have 2 mitzvahs in front of you, you do the first mitzvah first and you do the second mitzvah afterward. It's called ein maviren ala mitzvahs. You don't go over one mitzvah for another mitzvah. Comes in a lot of ways. The way you put your tefillin in your tefillin bag, for example, your talis and tefillin is done because of that. In the law, we talk about that. A lot of things come about. Okay, these are 3 concepts that come into play. Now, the first thing is to understand, in the times of the Talmud, how actually did they have the Seder? Now, it's mentioned in Tractate Bruchas, 39b, and it's brought here. Let me just read it here.
For anyone taking notes, that's Tractate Brachot or Brachos, 39, you said 39b?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talking about Passover, it says, Ma Beria de Ravina. Ravina's son said, now Ravina lived, I believe, in either the 4th or the early 5th century, Common Era. So we're talking about at that time, gives us what the custom is on Passover. So what is the custom on Passover? Is that you mania pedisa b'toich hashleima. You put a broken piece together with a whole piece. Mm-hmm. So what that means is when for Passover, when you start the Seder, what you have is you don't have two pieces and you break anything. You have a whole piece and you have a broken piece you put together with it. Mm-hmm. So essentially what you have is 1 and 1 plus matzahs. Why do you have the half of matzah? You have the half of matzah because of lechem oini, poor person's bread. And because it's Yom Tov, on Yom Tov, the rabbis have us that we should also have the double portion of bread. So you have to have 2. So on Passover, it's sufficient that you just have, because it's the poor bread is very important, it takes the place of a full one. So you have a full one and you half one for lechem oini. So that was in the rabbinic, after the temple was destroyed. When the temple was there, they only had half a piece.
So let me just recap on that real quick. So during the temple time, there weren't 3 matzahs. No. There was a half a piece of matzah.
Right.
If Passover fell out on Shabbat, would there have been 2 plus the half?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
That is a later argument. Okay. So we see in the Talmud times, the discussion is that it requires 1.5. And that's talking about regular on a Yom Tov, regular holiday. So like this year, Passover was on Thursday, Friday. So Wednesday night, when the first Seder was, if you had lived in the time of the 5th century, 6th century, 7th century, 8th century, something like that, you would have had 1 full matzah, and you would take a broken matzah and put it in there. Okay? The matzah afikomen is discussed later, but that's a different story.
Interesting.
And then that's
we have a number of questions, some more questions that are related to this. For example, the unleavened bread, the claim is, in the Messianic Seder,
the
unleavened bread is
found. Yeah, so we can't talk about the matzah touch until we finish the 3 matzahs. We're still like 1,000 or so years ago. Okay.
Okay, fine. So we're not even to the 3. So I'm going to take that one off the screen for the moment. We'll come back to it. Okay.
We got another 500
years. We're 1,000 years away still from the 3, huh?
Yeah, we got another 500-600 years until we really get to. Actually, we have probably almost 1,000 years until it becomes settled law, except for the Vilna Gaon who kept it until the 18th century, but nobody after the 18th century did it. But yeah, so until that time there was. Now, what happened? The Gaonim, that would be the period of time. Let's say about the late 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th century, probably that time. I think it's the Gaonim. I think they started from about the 8th century. Okay, they asked the question that you had before. Okay, if it's in the week, we understand, because it's actually the double bread is only a rabbinic thing, so it's enough you have 1 and a broken piece. But what happens on Shabbos?
Right.
Is it sufficient? In that there was a disagreement among the sources. Some sources said, well, on Shabbos, you really need to have 2 full pieces. So it ends up you have to have 2 and a broken piece. Mm-hmm. Others say no, because it's Passover, this broken piece is so important that we consider it as if it's a full piece. So 1.5 is. So we had, for a period of time, actually 2 customs going on when it was on Shabbos. Some people would actually take 2.5 and some would have 1.5. That was going together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that continued for quite a while. Eventually, the view, except for like people at the Vilna Gaon who kept only 1.5, eventually the view was that you would take 2.5, and that became the custom not just if it was on Shabbos, but also became the custom to take it all the time. Mm-hmm. Now, the next question, of course, is which matzah do you break?
Correct.
In that case, there's a very big disagreement. First of all, we see, for example, Rashi, who was in the 12th, late 11th, 12th century.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When he talks about the matzahs, there's a work called Machzah Vitri, which was from the Simcha, his Talmud, brings his customs. And he doesn't say which one it is. You can put it anywhere. You could break any one of the matzahs that you have. It doesn't make a difference which one. Where are the broken ones? Top, bottom, middle, whatever. He doesn't talk about it. Okay? The Maimonides, in his Mishnah Torah, Maimonides is definitely 12th century.
Yep.
Okay? And he says specifically here that you take two matzahs and you take a piece of matzah.
So 2 matzahs and a piece.
And you put the broken piece amongst them. Okay? It doesn't say specifically where. Now,
so we're not up to, so we don't have that component that's called in the 15
we don't have
stages, called yachatz.
Remember, until about, until the 7th, 8th century, something like that, we didn't even have 3 matzahs. And that 3 matzahs was only on Shabbos, and then eventually the custom by, say 500 years, 600 years, it was clearly the custom that we take 3 matzahs for any Passover, whether it was in Shabbos or in the week. Okay. Mm-hmm. Which is not uncommon with a lot of things we do, both Shabbos and Yom Tov, just so that people shouldn't make mistakes. So, okay. So let's talk about, now we're having 2.5 matzahs, which goes back, say, maybe 500 years. And before that, there's a lot of back and forth. For example, the Ran talks about it in Pesuchim, in Tractate Pesuchim, where he talks about it, and he talks about specifically taking about 1 matzah with a full matzah. The Ran would be about 13th century. I believe 13th century is the Ran, maybe 14th century. So what we see is this is a developing thing over time. There wasn't that. So which matzah you take? We see Rashi, of course, doesn't really clarify which one it is. The Rambam is not clear about it. Mm-hmm. But the first source, I believe, was the Rekayach, who I believe was somewhere around the 13th century. And he brings into this the concept that we have before. Now, in order to understand what he's saying, we have to understand what we do. There's 2 blessings that we make of the matzah.
You're almost done?
We make the blessing of the matzah like we make over bread every time, hamotzi lechem min ha'oretz, which is the blessing we make that allows us to eat food. And then, because it's a specific mitzvah, eating that special matzah, that piece of matzah, is the eating for the mitzvah of matzah. Because of that, we make a special bracha called achilas matzah, on eating matzah. So we make 2 blessings. The first one is the regular motzi, and the second was that. So I believe the Rekayach was the first source. All the early sources, the first says that, listen, we have a principle that when you do a commandment, you do it in the order. Okay? So the first thing you're going to do is the motzi lechem min ha'oretz, which is required to be on 2 matzahs.
Because of the principle of what we know as known as Torah kodem.
Right, you don't go over 1 mitzvah or another. And then you have the second one, which is the piece, which is the achilas matzah goes up. Now, as you know, Gavriel, because this is what you did, the custom is you hold all 3 matzahs, so you have 2 whole matzahs, 2 full matzahs to the beginning, and you make the bracha hamotzi lechem min ha'oretz. Then you drop the lower one, because the top one you've already made the motzah on. The middle one is the one you make achilas matzahs, you're holding that in your hand also. So you make achilas matzah on that, your motzah was on the top matzah. Now, as you know, of course, Shabbos, Friday night, we make the bracha hamotzi on the top matzah also. So the reason why is ein mavin al mitzvah. You don't want to go over 1 mitzvah. Since the mitzvah is eating matzah, the top matzah is the one you're going to eat for that mitzvah of eating matzah for the meal. Mm-hmm. And the second one is for achilas matzah, for the mitzvah of eating matzah, is the second one. So it ends up that the whole one is on top. The second one is the second mitzvah you're doing, and the bottom one drops away because you don't need it. We usually later on. It's usually later on in the Seder, but it hasn't done anything. So that's how you get 3. And that's how you get the custom that we have today. You have 3 matzahs. It ends up that you actually eat from the top one, the middle matzah, the broken matzah, okay? Dividing the matzah in the middle of the Seder, I'm not sure how far back that goes. Certainly when they're at only 2 matzah, we don't see it. Everybody talks about putting in a broken piece, which is broken earlier. So yachatz comes in later, probably somewhere, say maybe about between 1,500 and 1,000 years ago is when we first see it. We start seeing the payat that we say, Kadosh irchatz. As yachatz is breaking the matzah, that's probably less than 1,000 years old. So we have to say somewhere between 1,000 and 800,000 years ago is actually when the actual idea of breaking the matzah as part of the order of the Seder rather than breaking the piece beforehand comes into play.
So let me give a quick summary then for those who might have come in just a little bit later. We're talking about components of the Messianic Seder. We're asking the overarching question is it a proof of Messiah, or is it more of a spoof? And the first thing we've tackled is the claim that the three pieces of matzah not only have always been part of the Messianic, always part of the Seder, Messianic or otherwise, but that the breaking of the second piece, supposedly representing the Son, broken for the sins of the world, that really there's not always been three pieces of matzah. It began with just a piece of matzah, later adding to it, and ultimately coming down to more recent, in the last 500 years or so, that there were three pieces of matzah used at the Seder. So what does that do in terms of disruption or discontinuity to the Messianic claim here then? What happens to that?
Well, it's just flat out, a lie. It's bogus. It's a made-up history. It's it's trying to read into something, or basically, take over something that has nothing to do with them. I mean, it actually has nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever. All these customs have nothing to do with it. So anyway, so we have the three matzahs. We've got to talk about the afikomen. So eventually, the afikomen is extremely interesting. That's
the second piece that's broken.
That is that right? Piece. The other part of the piece. I mean, that's what it's called now. The problem is, if we go into the Talmud, that is not what it says. The Talmud is a Mishnah there. Towards the last of the Mishnah, I don't know if it's next to the last, but in the Talmud, let's have a look.
It's for you.
Yes, I'm going to have to ignore it for a second.
It's good. Good. Thank you for ignoring it.
Okay. It says in the Mishnah, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen. Now, the translation of this by the Messianic is so totally wrong, it's not even funny. Ein maftirin, you do not take out. Maftir means to take out in Aramaic. Achar Pesach, after you eat the Korban Pesach, afikomen. The word afikomen is a word that the Talmud is going to talk about. But what the afikomen is, from the Mishnah itself, is something that you don't do.
Let me just inject in the Messianic Seder that I was part of more than once. Afikomen is taken first from Greek to say, he will come or he has come. So you're saying, as we say in Hebrew, zelozeh. It's not it.
The Talmud understands it being Aramaic from the word pike. There's a very famous here. A pike man. A pike means to go out of, and man means a portion. Okay, or a pike man, or to go out from. So the Talmud gives a couple answers for it. A pike means to go out. Man can mean either a portion or to go out from someplace. So the Talmud brings two reasons for it. One is you don't go out, you don't leave. You don't break off your chabir, you don't break off your group to eat the Purim Pesach. You don't go out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The other one, which is the one that seems more accepted, there's like 3 or 4 views of it, is man is a delicacy. So after you eat, and you'll be familiar with this, after you've eaten the afikomen, and now we eat that matzah in the place of the afikomen, after you eat the Korban Pesach, and we eat that last piece of matzah in the place of the Passover offering, you're not supposed to eat man. You're not supposed to eat any kind of delicacy, not any kind of food whatsoever. The last thing that you eat has to be in your mouth, that Passover sacrifice, and today it's that last matzah that you eat. And of course, Gavriel, you're familiar from Halacha, that's exactly what it is. You don't take anything.
That's correct.
Okay?
Right.
So, and the Talmud talks about different things that delicacies people would eat at the end of the meal. So you're not allowed to eat these delicacies at the meal like you would normally eat. Normally at the end of the meal, you'd finish your meal and then you eat these delicacies. Different people would eat different kind of delicacies. Said, no, you're not allowed to eat those. Okay? So in the Talmud, and actually going again, we're talking about periods, 4th, 5th, 6th century, the word afikomen actually is what you don't eat. And it's basically meaning to take out some kind of a delicacy. And each rabbi from that period of time says a different kind of delicacy. And that's something you don't eat. Now, I have not been able to find when the name afikomen started to be referred to that matzah. Now, if you remember, Kadash Irchatz, we say it's called tzufoin, means you bring something, the hidden thing. Okay? Now, And of course, that's our custom, of course, now, which is, of course, very recent, and we'll talk about that in a second. So when that started to be called Afikomen, I really don't know. I haven't been able to find it. It's certainly called that now. It's probably been called that for certain another 500 years. Remember, for Jewish people, remember, if it goes back 500-600 years, that's pretty recent as far as we're concerned.
Correct.
That's pretty recent. A lot of the things that we do goes back to the Talmud itself and even earlier. We can. Now, what do you do with it? In that, there's all kinds of different customs. One of the customs was and I've seen it even in recent sources, you would give it over to somebody to hold for you for later on, just to make sure it doesn't get lost because you're going to have to eat it at the end of the meal. That's basically what you don't hide it. A very common custom, which I don't know how many hundred years is, we don't see it in the earliest form, although there seems to be a hint of it in the Gemara itself, but we don't really see any of the Rishonim talking about it, is that you let the kids steal it, and they, sort of like to keep them awake so they'll be up later into the meal, so that they should be up later. So we make a whole game about it and you buy it back, whatever. Okay. Some would do that. There's a custom actually to put it on your shoulder first, like the matzahs in Egypt, and then go around. I know people that even do that today.
Sure.
Some people put it just under the tablecloth to watch it out, to watch over it. And some put it under the pillow that they have on the bed that they're sitting on. Various different things to do, where to put it. There's no really specific thing. It's not really a question of being hidden in the sense of hiding it to find it or something like that. What it is, it's just put aside in some place where you know it is, in order that it shouldn't get lost, so you should eat it later on because it is part of the meal that you're having.
All right, you don't want it to get confused with the other, right?
Yeah, right. And Gavriel is, of course, if you do happen to lose it, there's no real problem. You just take another matzah and eat it. It's no real. No.
Correct.
It's not.
By the way, I have a question for you, and I don't. This is a fascinating, absolutely fascinating discussion. I am convinced that we could go for 2-3 hours on this, but I've just also been monitoring the chat a little bit as we're going, and we're going to have to really. It's amazing how the time has flown. Now, I want to just say to everybody that much of the information that we're talking about here, and we've really only scratched the surface on the components of the Passover Seder as it's messianically misrepresented. Rabbi Shulman has a paper. It's not that long a paper, but it's certainly probably the most thorough on the subject that I've run across. I'll give you the reference at the end, but there's some other things I think we want to jump into. We could spend the whole segment just talking about this. So I'm going to let you make a summary statement, but I want to migrate on to like another issue, like the whole issue about the Lamb, and because the whole New Testament paradigm, and you read into it early on in John chapter 2, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world, or in 1 Corinthians when Paul talks about JC being the Paschal Lamb, or in John chapter 6 where you've got to eat my body and drink my blood, the whole consumption aspect of it. And and then the whole desire in I think Luke 6 about the Passover the Passover meal together. So I want to get into some of these aspects that have to do with the lamb if we have time to do that. So if we can make a summary statement about the matzah and then segue to the misinterpretations related to the lamb and the type of sacrifice that it was.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. Okay. So essentially, I just want to do one thing because he says one thing that you said about the unity here that you wanted to talk about.
Yes.
Matzah tash. Yeah, and also you mentioned in your discussion about the stripes on the matzah. I want to answer those also, so because those are important. They have the unity. The truth of the matter is, it's like this. Such a thing is actually an Ashkenaz custom based on people who are, first of all, very, very strict about being careful that water does not get on the matzahs after they're baked. There's something called gebrachs, which a lot of people eat. So those people who eat specifically on a matzah from a bag are doing it in order to ensure that water doesn't get onto it. Okay, that's the whole reason why they have it. Okay, there's a lot of people.
So it doesn't become fermented or leavened.
It doesn't have to be covered over. I know a lot of people just put matzah on the table. The predominant custom is a lot of people have a plate which has the things on it, and they'll put it right on top of the matzahs. You don't even.
I have friends, Hasidic friends, who the matzah never touches the table itself.
No, my matzah never. My table doesn't have any crumbs on it at all. I'll pass over. We're fanatics, but that's because
you look like one, so I see that. So
I look normal. You're the one who's the problem. Anyways,
you're right.
Anyways,
and then let's not talk about William. Okay. So.
I was just thinking. I'm glad y'all aren't looking at me right now. Y'all have a lot to talk about.
Anyways, so in essence, the whole purpose of it is not because of that. The whole purpose is not to make a unity or anything. The whole purpose is in order to protect the matzahs from being contacted with water. Now, having the different things is really based on some things from the Leah Kudish, the Isaac Luria, and that would, of course, only go back about 500 years or so. So it has absolutely nothing to do with anything, the Trinity, Christianity, whatever. It has to do with things coming from the Zohar and intention, things that you're supposed to have in mind according to the D. So you have people who do that, but there are people who don't do that. The
so
other
summary statement on, let me just I'm saying for the sake of, because this, we're making this particular broadcast, recording this here just after Passover in the year 5780, and see, there's the time to summarize. The corresponding to the year 2020. You may be watching this sometime in the future. What we have demonstrated, I think, pretty categorically, is that the custom, the Messianic claim, really, that the three pieces of matzah historically have represented the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, is absolutely not true. And if you've been part of that milieu, then we have introduced you here tonight to food for thought, to really reconsider how it is that you've been fed this line that is not true. So here's, if we talked about proof or spoof, here's a pretty major spoof. Now, to be fair, it's a spoof that I think is not malicious. They're not cunning deceivers. They're passionate believers, but they believe something that is without foundation, without substance, because it's not historically verified.
Actually,
next move to you.
At that point there, actually, I believe it's deliberate. And the reason why I believe it's deliberate is their deliberate attempt to read into anything Jewish that somehow or other it happens to be a support or goes back to Christianity. So my belief is...
So that I'll give you. Yes, that I'll give you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The one last thing I want to say, we can go into the Passover sacrifice after that, is the holes in the matzahs. This is one of the biggest jokes that there ever is. The reason is because in the time of the temple, and I am not sure when it started, certainly in Europe, I'm not really sure when it started, the matzah that was eaten looked more like pitta. Pitta, if you know what it looks like, is a very, how do you describe pitta? I mean, pitta is pitta. It's a type of bread.
Pita bread, a little flat, flat bread. So
right.
Yeah. There are Sephardim that eat it today. That's
right.
That's
and it's cooked it's done in a quick way, so it shouldn't rise. There's no yeast to it; it doesn't rise, and it could be up to maybe about an inch in thickness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Shulchan Aruch talks about specifically that you can make it like that up to an inch. So we're talking about something that you talk about today, but we know certainly in the mainstream of Jewish law, that was common and well known 500 years ago, until 500 years ago. Now, what happens in Europe specifically, I don't know how it goes over the rest of the world, but in Europe specifically, they were concerned with that because there are problems once you do that. It is possible, very easily possible for that to become leavened and to start, making signs of it. So what they did is they started making matzahs very thin. The matzahs that we ate are very thin, and they're cooked very quickly. The problem with that is that the problem is that the dough could actually rise. It takes a while. It could actually rise before it cooks because you have to cook inside. If it starts blowing up, and then if it blows up, for example, you can get like a bubble in it, then the whole matzah become chumetz, become leavened, so you can't eat it. Throw it away.
That's right.
So what do they do in order to do that? They found that if you would make holes in it, it would let out whatever pressure would come, so it wouldn't balloon up.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, they put holes. Now, nowadays we have really nice things. We have, these kind of metal wheels that you go across it, and other times they used to do it with hammer on it, like a meat thing. They would hit it just to put holes in it, whatever. But the reason why it was done is because it became accustomed to use smaller and smaller matzahs to avoid the problem of it becoming leavened. And the other problem is that if you just put it in straight like that, you'd still have the problem. But they found if you put holes in it, it would stop it from rising. And you wouldn't have the ballooning up.
That's it. William, do we have time to talk a little bit about the lamb?
Yes, you go right ahead.
Okay, because another huge component, of course, that's used as a proof is to connect the events of the Passover night with the ultimate sacrificial substitutionary death of JC as the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world, as mentioned in John chapter 2. And so the whole idea of putting the blood on the lintel, etc., the idea of the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death passing over the homes that had the blood on the mashkof, on the lintel, on the sides as well, and that somehow, that forms a shape of a cross at the top and the two sides. See, that's a cross. I don't know what you do about the bottom, but that's another discussion. You know these things very, very well. Let's talk for a moment about the lamb itself. First of all, we know that the people could take either a lamb or they could take a kid, right? Nobody talks about the goat of God.
Really, the say usually refers to a young animal, so it could be.
Yeah, it could be a calf. Also, there's some places where it could be a calf. So,
depending on what you have. The most difficult problem for that is like this. I will eventually get into it in my talks. But in the sacrificial system, there's certain types of sacrifices that are brought. Okay? Now, in general, you can divide it into sin sacrifices and non-sin sacrifices. So for sin sacrifices, you have the oila, which
was completely consumed, right? Right.
And then you have a chatas and a asham, which are two types of sin. And these were eaten by the priests. But there are sin sacrifices. But you have a whole bunch of other sacrifices under the title of Shlomim or Todah, thanksgiving offerings or peace offerings to Hashem, which a person brings for themselves and they eat them themselves. These are our thanksgivings to Hashem. Now, the Korban Pesach is in that category. There's no sin associated with the Passover sacrifice itself. Now, there is on the Yom Tov of Passover sin sacrifice, which deals with trying to purify the temple, the temple or the tabernacle, whatever, from any kind of impurities that came into it. But when it comes to the sacrifice, Passover sacrifice, it is not a sin sacrifice. It is a sacrifice given of thanksgiving to Hashem. And
that's huge, and people have to hear that. The Passover sacrifice was not about sin; it was about thanksgiving.
Right. In fact, when the sacrifice was being done, they sang Hallel, they sang praises to Hashem as they were doing it. Part of it was that wasn't just being sacrificed, but they would be praising Hashem, specific psalms that are there, praising Hashem for the good things that he does for the people, because it was a part of thanking Hashem. And that had absolutely nothing to do with sin. You mentioned about the blood there. If you read the verse says that the blood is not a sign for God. The blood is a sign for the people inside. They're supposed to look. Hashem knows who's supposed to pass over or not. The blood is for them. The verse says it explicitly.
Is it also not fair to say that the fact the blood was put on the outside of the house there is a demonstration to the Egyptians that because they worshipped the young goat, the young lamb, particularly the lamb, and that this is the blood of your God on our wall.
1 second. The blood wasn't on the outside.
It was on the inside of the house?
It was on the inside. No. Now
how the doors were configured.
The Egyptians, of course, would know something was going on because they could smell the burning, flesh of the animal cooking. Yeah, right. And this was their god, so they were not very happy about that. And they already knew that the Jewish people ate, lambs and things like that, which were their idol. But no, the sign was for them, and the Egyptians, of course, were quite upset about that. But they had, more things to worry about at the time anyway, since there were a lot of people dying. So that was not their primary problem at the moment. Once the firstborn started dying, that was more of an interest, more important to them than.
Of course.
What the Jews were having a barbecue with.
Fascinating. I just want to quickly skim through a couple things here. They're going to go right across the screen. We talked about the afikomen. We talked about the middle matzah. We talked about actually what it means. Let's go to the last three that are here. I'll let you pick, of these that are here, either about the karpas we're just talking about that right now. So in the Messianic Seder, it'll say that the karpas is the hyssop, which was used to put the blood on the Passover of the lamb on the doorposts and the lintel. And you said something else about why the karpas was there and why the dipping was going on.
Yeah, that happens to do. Okay, the karpas is, of course, to remind ourselves of the. We don't dip in hyssop. We dip actually in salt water. They did in vinegar also, but that has nothing to do with that. That just has to. That's a reminder of us of the tears and stuff like that in the oppression that we had.
And I believe you wrote that it was a stimulus for children to ask questions.
Yeah, well, yeah. Everything we do on the Seder night is to ask questions. We do all kinds of weird stuff that the kids should ask questions. I was actually going to the last two of them because they were sort of interesting. The triangle, that's actually false. The triangular shape is actually based on a custom that goes back a few hundred years to the Leah Kudish. The way he said to set up the plate. In Ashkenaz, they don't set up with a triangle. It's in a circular thing.
Right.
Just a triangle.
It's a circle. Right.
So that's,
very good.
Again, another instance of ignorance of what the custom is. As far as Professor Birnbaum, that there was no one possible for people to offer the Passover lamb since the temple was destroyed, that's actually not true. Theoretically, you could do it. There are reasons why the rabbis don't allow it to do it because of problems of people going up on the Temple Mount and possibly becoming unclean and stuff like that. But theoretically, a person could actually go to a certain place and slaughter the Passover lamb even afterwards. I believe that in the time of Bar Kokhba they did that also. They did offerings of Passover lamb, but there were times that people in fact do it. And there's some strange people today who try and do it also. So it's not that it can't be done.
Well, the Samaritans have been doing it for a long time, so that's a big event.
We don't do it because of views taken by rabbis over the last few hundred years when it was possible to do it if we wanted to, not to do it. And I'm sure the fact that there's a few million Arabs around there probably has a little bit to do with the fact that we don't want them to get too upset about it since it's not,
Right. They seem to be upset enough on their own steam. So
the possibility is not because of the temple being destroyed. After the temple was destroyed, it was still brought by people who lived in Jerusalem.
Okay, so to summarize then, first of all, William, do you have anything else you want to toss into this interesting discussion here this evening?
Oh, my. I've been doing a lot of tech work for starters, so if I brought something up, you would probably say, no, we already covered that, and then I'll feel stupid. But for me... Is there anything flying in the chat at the moment, or at least I want to give people in the chat room, because there's a whole other world going on over there. Yes, there is. Let me look for any last minutes here. Okay, I'm looking for tags to Tanakh Talk. So if you're watching this right now, guys, make sure you just type in Tanakh Talk. I think you don't put a space. I'm not sure how it is, but it'll flag me, and I can see all of instantly I can see who makes a comment regarding it. I see some people want to contact me for whatever reason, but I don't see any direct questions. Yeah, and so okay, did you guys, did y'all discuss the idea about the Pesach is not a sin sacrifice, like in general?
Yes.
Okay.
We just
see what I say. See, I'm glad I reminded y'all to do it.
There really are like two or three dominant. If we could just again to summarize it and to make it easy for everybody,
that
and then
really
I'm going to encourage everyone. By the way, here's on the bottom of the screen here. You can see the link. You can write that down to judaismsanswer.com/passover.htm. I'll say it again. If you're listening on YouTube or some other source, judaismsanswer.com/passover.htm. We'll pull up that paper, and it's lots of references, lots of sources. So Rabbi Shulman doesn't leave anything to just stated opinion. It's backed up with pretty clear where you can go and find it. So essentially what we've done in our session this late afternoon, early evening, is we've demonstrated that there haven't always been, in other words, the Seder of today is not the Seder of the first century or 500 years BCE or 2 or 3 or 5 or 20 or 100 years after the Exodus from Egypt. The concept of using 3 matzahs is relatively recent. And for a long time, it was just 2.5. And in the beginning, it was just a half. So what does that do to all the symbolism and the significance of the Father, the Son, and the Holy you-know-what? So that's gone right out the window there. The whole idea that the second piece is representing the Son broken for the sins of the world, that it's wrapped up in a shroud, which represents the burial, and comes back representing the resurrection, that is completely painted into. It's a spoof text painted into the context here that cleverly. I remember when Eliezer Urbach, Alav Shalom, was giving this over those 4 nights at my church many, many years ago. And as people connected with the symbolism and they took the interpretation from that, they went, wow, this is amazing. You know, I went to Hebrew school, they never talked about this. Or I grew up in a Reformed congregation, they never talked about this. Or my parents were Holocaust survivors, they never talked about this sort of thing. And of course, to the ignorant, any interpretation is better than ignorance, right? So you can connect these dots and come up with a horse, but it's just a fabrication on paper. It's not real.
Right.
And the other thing that we've demonstrated tonight, I think pretty clearly, and there's more source material there in the paper that Rabbi Shulman wrote, is that the Passover sacrifice was not a sin sacrifice that is made up out of whole cloth, as Rabbi Singer says often, in the New Testament. It's retrojected into the biblical text, and it's simply not the case. It was a thanksgiving offering, thanking Hashem for being the one who was triumphant over all the deities of Egypt, and was proclaimed in the sight of the Egyptians, and it's commemorated from year to year. Mm-hmm. So there's more on this subject we could talk about, but I think we've done as good a job as we can in the relatively short amount of time that we could. And I want you to go home and do your own homework.
I'll give you one more jewel to chew on and, pardon the expression, but spit out. Is that the Messianics, particularly the Messianics, will use the same concept about Pesach and about the matzah as they do an actual Torah scroll, because it's pierced, it's striped, and all this other stuff, and it looks bruised because the old parchment looks like it's got rub marks on it, and they use the exact same concept, saying this is why that the Hebrew Scriptures were written on a Torah scroll that was foreshadowing that Jesus was going to die, and that he would also be pierced, for the stitches, and they would be, the scribe marks, the actual straight lines they make across there. So it's, everything is exactly the same logic. So if you'd like to say anything fun about that, that would be interesting.
Well, I would have to say that must have come up after I left the church. So I've never heard that one.
William, first of all, anybody who knows anything about history, scrolls were always sewn together that way.
Right.
There's nothing to do with the Torah. All scrolls. Whoever wrote a scroll which had more than one thing.
Interesting.
Were all written.
Yeah.
How
about that?
There's no other way to put them together. They didn't have, super glue or anything like that. They didn't have what we had now.
Art scroll bindery.
Yes, right.
As far as the lines are concerned, that's interesting. If you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see that if you ever see what's written in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the script goes up and down. It's very poor. The lines are there only because to add to the readability and the ability to make sure that the letters are written properly.
Right. That's
the whole purpose of it.
Right.
It's there for that. How long it goes back, I don't know. Probably not very long either. But it's there. The requirement is there basically for that.
Right. Yep.
Well, we have some good comments in the, just quickly skim the chat. Sorry for taking the glasses on and off, but it's, it's just us sitting around having a chat together. I want to thank everyone in the chat room for participating as well and for sharing their thoughts and their ideas. Rabbi Shulman, Rabbi Moshe, thank you so much for being spontaneous with us this afternoon. Not, in the Corona environment that we're all in. You were going to, I guess, head out to Manhattan for a falafel or something. Mm-hmm. But thank you for being available, and thank you for your expertise and your insight, and for writing the paper that I think will be very helpful to a lot of people. If we just help one or two people, get out of the falsehood and connect with the truth, then I think we did a lot of work here tonight, and it's worth the effort.
And before you take that off screen, because I'm fixing to bring up counter-missionary work, look at the website at the bottom of the PowerPoint there, judaismsanswer.com/Passover HTML. Now, he's got a lot more information at the website, tons and tons of it. So you could call his website Rabbi Shulman's book if you wanted to, because that's where he's gathered all of his resources. So that's where you want to go, judaismsanswer.com. And then, so gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me here. This has been a great show. Gavriel, it was a great idea having you and everybody loves the dueling rabbi sort of idea. So having two teachers at a time is really, really
I saw
great
somebody
idea.
say the duo of knowledge.
The dynamic duo. You notice they didn't include me in that.
Right. Well, I also just want to say, I haven't said this for a while. I'm sorry. I guess I'm fighting to get in the last word, but William, kudos to you for the incredible depth of dedication that you constantly display in keeping this funky little thing called Tanakh Talk going, and the investment that you've made financially and an effort, and the part your family has played in this. And I just want to ask people, all of us who were part of the church before are used to the concept of tithes and offerings. And so I'm going to ask you to kind of reanimate that in your own practice and, send something. If it's $5 a week or $10 a month or something, you can do that through the. There's information. There's you've got. Is PayPal the primary way that you do that, or you have other means as well?
Yeah, I've got a PO box. A lot of people don't use social media or any kind of internet, and so I've got a PO box. You can rewind the video to hear me repeat it, but it's PO Box 1444, Kingsland, Texas 78639. And then but yeah, that's it. And that's exactly at the 1 hour mark, 1 hour and 1 minute mark on the video. So, Gavriel, thank you very much for your kind words
pleasure.
And your support. And Rabbi Shulman, it's always a pleasure. I love seeing you in all these different environments. So far I've got you on 3 shows, and I think that's kind of fun. You could have started invading the rest of my shows
He's taking
soon.
over.
Hey, if you watch my show tonight, my next show is at 7 p.m. in 45 minutes, and one of our rabbis is missing, so I'm going to do the show by myself, a call-in Q&A, so you should call and harass me. Or you could call in if you wanted to answer a question or hop on the chat. But anyway, guys, thank you. Y'all are amazing. Totally enjoyed y'all, and I look forward to seeing you guys again. Gavriel, both of y'all next week at our normal times. I'll put it that way. So thank you so much, both of you. Love you guys.
Shalom, shalom. To everybody. Blessing and success to all.
Shalom, shalom, y'all. Thank you.
Shalom, shalom.
So these books on screen right now, guys, are Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical 2-volume book set, available at OutreachJudaism.org and Amazon.com. Judaism and Christianity: A Contrast by Rabbi Stuart Federow, available at his website. Give me a second. Just your like. What Jews Believe, whatjewsbelieve.org. Revealing Matthew's Secrets by Jason Lacrosse and Leaving Jesus by James Wood Jr. are both available at Amazon.com. Thank you all. I've had a blast, and we'll see you guys soon. Shalom, shalom.
כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד.